how I got into tech is also a bit complicated, not the most straightforward path, and a lot of it I got lucky. Like the industry was very young back then. It was way easier to find a job. I just applied for some entry level job and they got me and I just rolled with it in a way. So it wasn't planned, it wasn't strategic, and what's important about it is that I'm kind of helping people to do it in a better way than I did. I literally did all the possible mistakes along the way. So that's the story. And how I got into mentoring, it's also at some point I realized I really hate the 9 to 5. Back then I was still living in Israel. I also broke up with my ex-girlfriend. I moved by myself to Tel Aviv, and I was kind of in this phase in life that I really didn't like the 9 to 5. I got fired from a job and I was still after a breakup. And there was this point of, fuck it, I'm buying a one-way ticket to Thailand and I'll figure out later what to do with myself. Um, and this one-way ticket turned out to be one of the best decisions I've made.
Just to kind of summarize a little bit, you built a blog for something you were interested in that gave you some skills to kind of work as a developer. How long did you work as a developer in a job as an employee before you decided I really need to change things up?
So I worked about 10 years total in the Israeli startup industry. I worked in many different places because I got fired a lot. And to this day, I consider myself borderline unemployable. That, because there was a lot of things I didn't know about my capabilities and uh, how to get along in the working environment, what was expected of me, what I should have expected of this environment. And this is kind of my personal path that I realize that a lot of things that I do in life, I have to pretty much invent them for myself from scratch. Like it's very hard for me to find something that somebody else tells, oh, do this, do that, and adjust myself to it. And pretty much all of what I do now, I have also some other projects that I do outside of this mentoring. And all of them are things that I came up with them on my own.
Yeah. So it sounds like being creative, building something, kind of discovering, processes or new skills is really important to you. And I wanted to use that as a pivot for the majority of the conversation that we're going to have around, you moving to mentorship and supporting newer developers to kind of go through this journey that you went through. What was the kernel of you starting to do that?
Well, the kernel was that I was out of money in the beginning, at least. And I was reaching out to everybody I knew looking for some freelance jobs because back then I didn't like, I needed to find a way to not get back to 9 to 5, which was literally the closest thing to hell on earth for me. And one friend recommended me this website called Code Mentor. I signed up from there and suddenly it clicked. Like I realized the teaching was, first of all, way more enjoyable and I was way better at it. Like there was a much better product market fit of me for the market in whatever I could do than just writing code in an office. Um, at first, I couldn't say why. And there were a lot of times that I was thinking when people asked me something, oh, but you could have Googled that. And then I realized that this wasn't at all the essence because this has to do with blind spots that people have and the way they think and the way they approach problem solving, that I tended to see things that they didn't notice themselves, and I kind of could point them to this place. Like, have you looked there? Have you tried this thing? Have you thought about this idea? And they were like, oh no, I haven't. This is interesting. And I've been doing this for about 5 years now, and a lot of this time was actually me formulating what is it that I even do to kind of understanding what is my value and all of that and how can I double down. I don't see a lot of people who do this kind of, say, coding therapy that I do, which is noticing why people don't understand what they don't understand.
Yeah. So it's great that you basically leaned into, maybe an intuition of perhaps I could teach people, and someone suggested where you could start doing that. And that kind of put you on a new path, right? Of taking the experience that you sort of stumbled into and learned. In fact, that's kind of how I got into tech as well. I built a website for an events company I was running, and then that turned into other websites. Um, but basically, it's really cool to see how you saw, what your biggest strength was, right? And then how that grew over time. Because honestly, I always think, there's so many people in the world and everyone has different strengths. And it really takes a while to figure out, like, what is my strength, right? And you're trying different
Yes,
things.
yes.
You're working in companies, you try different projects, you explore different hobbies. And then at some point, you find at least the kernel of like what the strength could be. And then you continue to experiment from there. So it
Hmm.
sounds like a form of technical training and therapy was the combination for you.
Yes, yes, kind of. Because it was always very personal for me. I think that my own journey of having really hard time to find a fit professionally in the world was something that it was deep for me. It was something that I had to really understand what was going on. Why was I feeling the way I was feeling? Why did I have the experiences that I did? And out of that, I built something that I saw could be useful for other people. And when it clicked, it's just, I don't think I could have done anything else in a way, because when I finally understood it, I didn't want to stop talking about it because it suddenly made sense to me, and I was like, "Oh my god, this is cool stuff. This can be useful for someone," and turned out that it was.
So thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to reiterate how important it is to continue to share these different stories that everyone comes into, even tech, obviously other professions, but tech from all these different backgrounds and all these different pathways. And in fact, the future of work is completely changing and people are coming into tech from like all kinds of backgrounds. So it's a place where you can reinvent yourself. And that's kind of what I really love about it. So let's jump into kind of your process and something you really wanted to touch on. Maybe this could be kind of a big part of our conversation. So something that, if anyone's familiar with, like, of course, personal development and therapy and, psychology, there's the concept of the conscious and the unconscious. And we're not going to dive into, therapy concepts today, but I'd love to hear some of your stories around how this shows up when you help developers gain confidence and actually lean into their strengths.
Yeah, that's a really cool topic for me. And I even, this might be a bit too esoteric for this podcast, but I've been digging a little bit into human design, which is a branch of astrology, let's say it this way, which kind of shows, they call it the science, and I don't agree the word with science, but they call it the science of differentiating people. And the main thing that it gave me is noticing that people, like the processes we have in our thoughts, in our emotions, in our experience, are wildly different. The more you dig into it and the more you have conversations with people, you realize how the way they think, the way they perceive their thinking, the way they feel things, and the way they later understand those emotions are wildly different from one person to another. And this is why I don't think I could ever, for example, do a course for the masses, because working one on one, you can really, like, I can give advice to one person. And literally today, I had a session that I gave the absolute opposite advice to another person. And I said, like, your processes are completely different in this regard. And what will work for you will probably do you harm, and the other way around. And the topic of that was actually the conscious access to our own thinking processes. So we think about a problem, we think about something, but sometimes we don't notice that we think. It's like there are words on a screen, and now I'm looking on my screen, but I can look away. The words are still there, but it's just my focus, my attention is in a different direction. So I'll give an example because it's all a bit in the air. I have a student who has hard time formulating what he's doing. Every time I ask him questions, why did he do this? Why did he do that? He has hard time explaining it, and sometimes like really basic concepts. Like I ask him, he got stuck on writing an object, and it's not that he hasn't done this many times before, but it's like with the pressure of me asking him, he blanked on that. And it was a perfect example of an unconscious thinking process because outside of the session, he has built a huge app that can become a product that is an amazing piece of portfolio. Um, and he knows how to do those things. But it's like when I ask him, how did he do it? He blanks on that. And now I realize that he's not aware of the thoughts that go through his mind while he's doing it. And he only gets the end result. And I'm like this also. I sometimes just know how to say to the person the right thing at the right time when I'm doing the mentorship, but I don't know where it comes from. And the opposite of that is people that can really clearly describe their process, is people that, well, I have a friend like that. And she has really easy time telling everything that goes on in her mind, how she conceptualizes the world, ideas that she has, and it's super simple. And for example, she feels something and she can immediately say, "Oh, Ilya, this is what I felt. This is what happened. This that," and it's super accessible. So she, when thoughts go through her mind, she looks at the screen. She notices them. When I have thoughts go through my mind, my attention is elsewhere. My attention is somewhere else in the world, and I suddenly, oh, I have an insight. Oh, I have an idea, but I wouldn't be able to explain to you what was the entire process of me coming to that, like Tyrion in Game of Thrones. I drink wine and I know things. So it's my case. In my case, it's I drink coffee and I know things. And like a year ago, I would imagine that everyone are like this, that everyone have thoughts working this way, but apparently not. Emotions also. Some people have just a stronger baseline of constant emotions that influence them in a certain way, and some people just don't. And both of them are kind of parallel realities that are very different that each person needs to navigate.
Yeah.
Another great example is a student who has a really conscious access to his thoughts, but his thoughts are stopping him because his thoughts, and he's very aware of them, because it's really easy for him to say, oh, I was thinking that I couldn't do this, that it would take a very long time, that it could, that I wouldn't know how to do this. He knows all these thoughts and they influence him. He doesn't know what to do with them. So my advice to him was, why don't you write down these thoughts? Because then you can take them out of your consciousness and identify with them less. You can look at them. You already have
Mhm.
access to them, but you don't know how to manage them. So if you look at them a little bit externally, they are not your voice. They are like a voice of somebody on the TV when you put
Mhm.
them outside in writing.
Yeah, like a teleprompter. So some people, they have the teleprompter going and they can read it and have access to it. So they're conscious to the thoughts, right? They can read the
Mm-hmm.
teleprompter. And for some, the teleprompter is going, obviously they're thinking, but they don't really access it. They don't like connect with it consciously, but they're just going
Yeah.
through the process, somewhat like of a creative flow. So, you know, sometimes you like get really into something or into a flow and you're just doing all these things. And then you look up a few hours later and you're like, oh, I just did this. I created this project, or I did this drawing. And you're like, oh, wow,
Mm-hmm.
what just happened, you know? So, and then there's a lot of shades of gray in between, right? And one thing
Yes.
I also wanted to point out is that um, at certain points you can go on both sides, right? You have different poles, right? You can have completely almost oblivious of what's happening, and then you need to work a little harder to figure out like what is happening in terms of what am I thinking, how do I show my work. Especially in the tech space, like the showing your work is like 90% of the work, right? Because you have to get
Mm-hmm.
buy-in, you have to explain. And I always think back to grade school when we had, a math test, or some kind of science test. You have to show your work. You can't just put an answer. Most of the time it won't work, right? They're going to be like, okay, your answer's right, but show your work. How do we know it's your work?
Yes, exactly. And this sucks because for people with unconscious process, this is something that is much harder to do. And it's like, I think the people with the conscious thinking process are the ones that dominate, let's say, social media. They are the ones who's very easy for them say, I woke up today at 5 a.m., I wrote this, I planned this, I did that. And it's like very verbal. And I look at it and like, oh my God, it just makes me tired to read this. Like, how does it work? And it seems all so fast and so clear. And it's like, it would never work for me because I just
Mm-hmm.
wake up in the morning and I do things, and and somehow it
Yes.
ends up with something, but it's an entirely different process, and I don't think it
Yeah.
it changes. Like this is something that is literally part of your body and the and your brain and your
Yes. It's a
neural
habit.
system.
However,
No,
what's
it's not a
interesting.
habit.
Oh,
Sorry, it's not a
oh, that,
habit.
yeah. Go ahead.
It's your wiring. That was I
Ah,
was trying to
okay.
say.
I
It is
see.
your wiring. It's not something you can train yourself to do better. It's something you can learn to understand and work with it, but
I
it's not
see.
something you can change. It's part of how your the brain that you were born with, the body that you were born
I
with.
see. I see. The wiring of like how you process information. Like if you
Yes.
see a cow, some people might say there's a cow, but another person might look at it and think there's a cow, but another person might look at it and just like not really realize they're seeing a cow, maybe. So different perceptions, right? And different
Yes.
showcasing of their perception. And that shows
Mm-hmm.
up in the technical part when you have to learn new things, right? And integrate them into your workflow and then share that with others. So there's so many different steps, right? Um, but what I wanted to ask is, how do you go from identifying, okay, here's what my wiring is, to un- like to bridging that gap of showing your work? Because in tech
Mm.
and in general in the workplace, that is an important part. Unless you're a solo artist or like a freelancer that's working completely by yourself, which is a whole different thing, right? Most people aren't
Yeah.
doing that, if you're working in a company. How do you create that bridge?
Okay, so the first thing that I want to say about it is that my goal with anyone who comes to me for mentorship is not to make them fit into something. My pretty much only goal is to make them aware of what is blocking them. What they do with that is really up to them because, yeah, some people can discover that they really cannot fit into the mold, into what is expected, and it's fine. It's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely fine. In most cases, people get really good results because they come to me when they already have the drive. They come to me when they already want to do something and it's prominent enough that it drives them. So the first of all, you need to identify what is it that it is hard for you to do. And if it's hard for you to showcase your work, to explain your work. Um, you can train to do this a little bit more. I mean, I'm not saying that you're born like this and it's fixed and you cannot improve it, but yes, it will be harder for you. It will be something that you will get stuck with, and I think a good thing to understand is that you will have a path that it is a little bit more difficult than somebody who has more conscious way of explaining their thoughts, and there is no way around it. And there are different paths that you can choose that will be easier for you to go. So, for example, I'm not aiming people saying you have to get a job into tech. No, maybe you can be an entrepreneur. Then you don't need to explain to anyone what it is that you're doing. You just have to do it
Yeah.
and show the
Yeah.
end result, and nobody cares how you did it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think really, really important to not try to pigeonhole yourself into an idea that you have of what you should be doing, but really figure out what it is that you are good at and see if with some effort it gets better and you can try to get where you want, or at some point to say, okay, maybe this isn't working. And it's not working usually when it just brings you more suffering than good results.
Yeah.
When you feel that you always have to push against some kind of really hard resistance. But then again, also the resistance can be fear, the resistance can be other things that you can't get over. So this is why I said it a few times. I don't have general advice that can work for everyone. You really need to
Hmm.
discover your unique case to figure out what would be better for you.
Right, because there's different paths. And I know on LinkedIn, a lot of people talk about full-time jobs because that's the marketplace, but there's other
Mm-hmm.
marketplaces out there. There's freelance marketplaces. You could also use LinkedIn and other places for, developing a business, for taking, your unique background in something. If you come from a different industry and your tech skills and developing something from there. So that's kind of also why I love tech, because there's a beauty in just being able to create whatever you want. The popular media, like on LinkedIn and a lot of the posts, yeah, of course, there's a lot of like full-time job conversations, but that's just one bubble, right? There's a lot of other bubbles out there. um,
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to chat about, some examples, like maybe how you worked with current clients, maybe one or two clients that you can talk about, and what their experience was like and how you helped them, figure out resistance or overcome some challenges.
Mm-hmm. Sure, sure. Um, so first of all, I think it's at first I thought it's a bit random, but it's probably not. That a lot of clients that I end up having are clients who are more on the abstract, creative side of thinking. A lot of people with ADHD diagnosed or self-diagnosed. um, so like a simple use case, a guy that I mentored a few months, maybe half a year back, that had a psychology background. And his challenge was that he didn't know how to get over debugging and error messages. It would paralyze him because he would spiral into this thing. It is beyond me. It's not something I can solve. And when we started digging into it, I realized that he has a very verbal thinking. So everything was a little bit interchangeable to him. And I had to basically go with him through this process of understanding that code is super, super specific. Like there are no two ways in most cases to write the same thing. And to kind of take his abstract thinking and really bring it into something concrete. So, for example, he would look at a chunk of code and tell me, oh, this does this and that. And ask him, well, how does it do it? Like, show me how does it tell the computer to do this and that? And then he would blank because he would realize that he had an idea about the code, but the idea wasn't the reality. And the process was really kind of from these ideas to look at the code. What does this letter do? What does this dot do? What does this bracket do? Um, and then he learned to debug, and then he basically understood how it works, because I think he had more conscious access to his thoughts. It's just he didn't know how to formulate it. And this is the advantage of having conscious access, is that you can it is easier for you to reshape them.
Hmm. Yeah, you
So
can actually be aware of what's going on,
mhm. And
right?
then he built his own product, which is an app for pets, that you have a physical product like a pet collar with a QR code that gives you an information. And I think he's soon to launch this product.
Hmm.
Yeah, we spoke a little bit, and he said like I asked him if he needs more help, and he said like, no, I just use the principles that you taught me, and I actually don't have any more need for
Mhm.
that. I was like, I did my job too well there. Maybe I
Yeah.
should have held back a little bit.
No, that's great. That's great. A lot of
I'm
times,
joking, of course.
um,
I wouldn't be able to do that even if I wanted to.
you know, if, for example, everyone listening here is thinking, okay, I want to find support in different ways, that can look differently, right? You can, on one end, hire a mentor or coach. On the other end, kind of have a couple of different developers that you check in with. In the middle ground, join some collaborative projects. So there's lots of options. But basically, the benefit of having, someone that does support professionally, like Ilya, me, a lot of others on LinkedIn, they basically like that's what we do, right? So um, you can move faster if someone helps you reflect in just the right way. So it's like shining a light on that one spot that is really holding you back. You get that light and then you understand what to do next, right? A lot of times, Elia, you talk about the resistance. You basically like helping them shine a light of what does this resistance really mean, right? And then the person can figure out what the next steps are, because we all have immense resources, and know what we need to do next once we get that support to kind of break through, or shine a light on something that we don't want to look at, or maybe we don't have the capacity to look at that moment, right?
Or we're not ready to look at it. There can be many cases
Yes.
that a person is really not ready to look at. And this is a mistake I've done a few times, because when I see something, it's hard for me to hold back and kind of not say. And I realize how much of a bad idea it is. Like if somebody is not ready to hear your so perceived wisdom, it's a really bad idea to try and tell them anything. Like now I realize that the students that come to me should really be somebody who sees me, that it resonates, that they feel, oh, I want to hear what he has to say to me.
Yeah.
Because if they don't, and I know I can sometimes annoy people with some of ideas that I have, and it's fine. It means it's just not the right fit. Don't come to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also really important to consider when you're coming to someone for help, whether for a paid service like coaching and mentorship, or even, a DM you send. You want to think, what kind of advice am I really ready for? And that could be a bit of coaching yourself, right? Um, and when you recognize, okay, I really want to either move faster or learn something new, that someone can help me understand better, or I just want that support, because like no one really needs to be going through anything alone, like especially when we have so much community now. I don't know if you remember, Ilya, but before, like 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't a lot of community around
No, there wasn't.
being into
Wasn't at all.
becoming a developer. You just had to, I don't know, there's like some websites and maybe a few blogs. I remember there was one person who was writing really well on product management, because that's what I was studying. And that was mostly what I had to go on back then. And it was good. He was a very good writer. Um, but nowadays, no one has to do this alone. There's a huge community. There's a bigger push for having more diversity, having more people in the space from different backgrounds. So, you know, everyone has a different style. You definitely attract more creatives because you're more on the creative side. And I probably work with certain other kinds of people, and other coaches have their styles. And there's everyone for all kinds of people, right? But you have to understand, like yourself, for anyone listening, like, where do I stand? Am I open and potentially ready, or do I feel ready? How ready are
Mm-hmm.
you to actually absorb advice or new information? How do you gauge that, and help people kind of understand that, like where their readiness
Gauge what
is?
exactly? Their level.
Yeah.
If they're willing to sign up.
Mm-hmm.
With my students,
Yeah.
it's super. If they're willing to sign up, it means they're ready, because it costs them
Mm-hmm.
money. And I realized over doing sales calls is that um, there's nothing I can say. It's not like I'm selling a product. It's not like I'm selling you an iPhone and you know the end result. Like, you have to believe in yourself and you have to trust that this process will give you something in the end. And absolutely nothing I can say can change this. It can, it can answer some questions, but I cannot make you believe in the end result. This is something you have to do for yourself. So sometimes I do feel that I can really help someone, but for whatever reason, they don't feel the same, or they don't feel that they can be helped or whatever. And then it means that they're just not ready, or maybe I'm just not the right fit for them.
Yeah. What's another case study of kind of helping someone navigate, getting into development, but maybe having it be super new for them? What does that look like for one of your clients?
Um, so I think the client, one of my first clients, and she stayed with me for a little bit over a year. She came with very little background, and it was kind of a little bit similar. Like, she had some background in Python, some tutorial help, and she was working in IT and she really wanted to switch to tech. And she was super driven. She was, she still is, smart. And her, like, the thing she got stuck with is that she really couldn't see herself becoming a developer. Like, it was so much outside of her conceptual possibility that each time she would really get demotivated and just want to quit and stop. Um, but there was a part of her that just wouldn't let her. She would procrastinate for weeks and say, like, what's the point of it all? But she wouldn't stop the mentorship. Like, she would show up and she would show up and say, like, what's the point of this? And at some cases, I think I really held her hand. And also, I was learning back then a little bit more about ADHD, and we used a lot of mindfulness exercises and things that can help somebody with an ADHD. Um, I think a lot of it really came down to mindfulness, to noticing those emotional states. So, for example, for her, her emotions, I think, were more on the unconscious area. Like, she just wouldn't do, but it would take her a long time to notice what actually was it that she was feeling about it. This is how I
Yeah.
would conceptualize it now. I'm not even sure that I'm 100% correct on it, because I would need to go and ask her some questions to really understand if it's like this or not. But yeah, this is another case. And now she works in tech and very happy about it. She's now, I think, already 2 years on her job and thinking about switching to a new one and upgrading her existing job. So I'm
Amazing.
happy
Yeah.
about it. Yeah.
So I'd love to touch on the fact that, if anyone listening here, like people that are a little more on the creative side and maybe don't see how they could fit into tech or what tech looks like for them, it seems like you have a great process to really help those people, right? Because maybe you have also kind of more of a flowy, creative, not so like technical, but you can do the technical work. Just the approach you give to it is more unique than someone that's, a math whiz or something. And
Yeah,
there's space for
probably.
everyone. um, so
There
I
is,
guess, yeah.
say,
Mhm.
I just wanted to say, there is saying, I think, from Dr. Phil. He said you never solve money problems with money. And I think it's
Mhm.
very correct that you never solve code problems with code if you get stuck with coding.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's interesting that, development and doing the technical work, it's a tool, right? And for some people, it's a very attractive tool, and it's something very interesting to them. Like a lot of people tell me they like solving puzzles, and this is a very like similar experience where they get to be mentally challenged, they have career growth, it's well paid, things like that. Um, but it is very interesting to me how like people come into this work from all kinds of backgrounds and like mental, like in different mindsets and industries and things like that. I
Yeah.
just think it's really cool that that exists.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true. And by the way, the example with that student, she didn't have, she was very kind of sciencey background. She was working in IT, so she wasn't on the more creative side, let's say. But other than that, you're right. Yeah, I coached people with very different backgrounds. And I think there are a lot of, we live in a world where everyone wants to say this is the one right thing to do and everything else is wrong. And I really hate this idea because the
Mhm.
one right thing that you believe is the one truth is either the truth for you or just a bad clickbait.
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly a lot of clickbait there. um, and that's something that I think about a lot um, when it comes to tech, because and when it comes to like marketing and technology and how to get into the technology space. It's a newer pathway, right? It's a newer type of getting into the workforce in like a completely different way. And there's marketing around it as well, especially in the bootcamp space or like the courses space and things like that. And what's
Mm-hmm.
awesome is that there's so many options, but it's sometimes hard to figure out what makes sense for me. Like, how do you even evaluate what works? Because like the marketing sounds nice, and you can look at it and be like, oh, this is an okay path and this path sounds good. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on, how marketing plays into it? I feel like it really messes with a lot of people's minds. When, for example, let's say you're on, YouTube, LinkedIn, some Instagram, and you see ads, and one ad is for, a self-taught course, and it's like, you can do it yourself, just 10 months of self-teaching, and you could be a developer. And then you see an ad for a boot camp, and it's like 4 months of intensive training, and you can get your first 100K job. I don't know. How do you evaluate that kind of stuff?
Um, that is a hard question, actually. I don't think I have a straightforward answer to it because, again, this depends on how well you know yourself and what works for you. So I would recommend anyone to just try on their own, try to make something. And a lot of the blocks that we have in trying to make something is all the bullshit that we hear. You have to be this to be a programmer. You have to know this to be a programmer. You have to read this book and that book. And everybody tells you what it is to be a programmer, what it is to be this and that. And it's with everything in life. What it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, what it is this. And it's all a pile of steaming crap. So get to know yourself a little bit and see what works for you. I think that when you try things, you kind of notice. Maybe videos work for you. Maybe it works for you when somebody explains it to you. Maybe it works for you that you really just focus on it and do everything on your own, or you read. Um, Try to follow kind of clues. What inspired you to kind of do something and it worked? Because I wrote this one post on LinkedIn and I said, how do you know that all this influencer advice is mostly bullshit? Because you hear it, it sounds well, but then what do you do? Because most of these things that sound good to you, you never do absolutely anything about it.
Yeah.
And we tend, like, there is this whole concept of if you don't do something, then you're lazy, then you're procrastinating, that you're not motivated enough, you need more motivation, you need more Tony Robbins in your life, you need, oh, let me sell this to you, right? And just
Yeah.
notice what is it that you do. Notice it that what is it that you're drawn to naturally doing when you get up in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it can be challenging because it's something sometimes you can get up in the morning for years and think I want to do this thing and it's just bullshit thought because when you start doing this thing you realize you don't really enjoy it, but sometimes you try to do it and you get a lot of satisfaction and then you realize you quit because something didn't work. So try to see what is it that you're actually doing, what is it that you actually enjoy to do. Is it, are you stopping doing this because you feel something bad, because you feel, I don't know, if this doesn't come out well, maybe I'm a failure, maybe I will never understand this, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you just simply don't enjoy it. Maybe this is just something your parents told you should be doing, or your teacher in
Yeah.
school told you should be doing.
Yeah. I mean, that those are all amazing points. And I think about this all the time. And I definitely mention it when I'm talking with people around, what are the different ways you could do things and what strategies could work and things like that. It really depends on your lifestyle and your learning style and all this stuff. So, if anything, the takeaway from this little bit is to really lean into self-discovery in terms of what do you want to try to do next in terms of if it's a new industry or a new role, or maybe you're looking into how do I excel in my role. There's probably something that you can build or interact with people around or things like that. I like to think of it. Recently, I did a presentation around building leverage and impact. And I broke down the concepts of kind of leverage in like people, process, and product, right? So if it's people that you're using as a lever, you can have interactions, you can have conversations, right? Maybe you're not ready to build, but you can contact people and say, hey, I really appreciate a conversation. Maybe you're a really big self-starter and you just need to like create something to figure out whatever you need. And that's where you do lean on product, you build something. Or sometimes it's process. Sometimes it's like learning and understanding how things work and stuff like that. So it's a mix of things. I totally agree. And I love your point around, the reading influencer content versus actions. Because it's obviously not, connected all the time, and it's not meant to be either, but it's kind of weird because LinkedIn has a lot of educational content and actually promotes educational content through its algorithm and the way people respond to things, because we all love educational content, right? Like
Yeah,
what we love
yeah.
imagining what we could be doing, but we don't need to
Yes,
do all of
exactly.
it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I want to say something small on what you said. I think these are really good categorizations. Uh, People, process, and um, well, the end
Product.
result itself, the
Yeah.
product, yeah, the end result. Um, and I think that these are, yeah, just one nuance that you said, notice what you want. And what I say is notice what you're doing, because if you wake up in the morning and you really want to call a bunch of people and talk with everybody and share your ideas, then you're in the people category. So lean into that. If you wake up in the morning and you have a vision and you really like, you just want to get to the end result, you want this thing to exist in the world to be done, then this is obviously what you should be leaning. And if you're a process person, then the how you do things is what's important to you, like noticing the little details, improving your process, and the end result may not be important to you. So for a person like this, he can hear 1,000 times, set goals, set goals, set goals, and he's like, but I don't care about the goals, I just care
Mm-hmm.
about the road, how I get there. Maybe I don't even
Yeah.
care where I get in the end, and that's
Yeah.
also fine. You don't need the goals. So,
Yeah.
and this is where the notice what you actually lean into naturally comes in. Because if you want to call everyone in the morning, just do that. Don't try force yourself to have goals, or don't try to really drive yourself crazy with little details that you don't really care about. Just talk with people and see how you can double down on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in addition to that, like I know we touched on resistance a little bit. If you're trying to figure out like doing some self-reflection, it's like, okay, let's say easy example is like, I did a boot camp, what do I do next? um,
Mm-hmm.
your self-reflection can be around what do I tend to do more naturally? Do I tend to build? Do I tend to have conversations? Do I like a combination of certain things? Like a lot of people that I know come to me, they're like, what's my next step? How do I navigate that? Right. And there's different avenues, there's different like doors to navigate that from. Eventually, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
be kind of doing it all, right? Because even if you start with, if you have the least resistance because you're most enthusiastic or naturally interested in talking to people, you'll start there. Fine, that's point A, right? But then to get to
Mm-hmm.
point C, D, E, you'll probably have to build something as well and, learn about the process too. So you can get that whole well-rounded thing, but you can start at any point because you can still go all around, kind of the point.
Well, honestly, I don't believe in well-roundedness. I believe in what Charles Bukowski said, find what you love and let it kill you. There is no well-roundedness in that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Um,
I
but to
see
stay on
that. Yeah.
to
No, I
stay
get
on
that.
point more, it's you can um, you can improve things. I'm not saying don't ever try to improve what you're not good at naturally. I'm just saying don't do this without understanding yourself better why you're not good at it.
Mm-hmm.
The maybe you're a shy introvert and it will never be very natural for you to call a
Right.
lot of people or to go out, but you can say, oh, I'll do this like one day in a week, or if I feel especially energized and good mood, I'll try to make a few more calls. So
Mm-hmm.
don't lean into this, I have to do this, I have to achieve
Mm-hmm.
this and that. Do this in a more gentle way of like, how would it work better for me doing this thing, like how
Mm-hmm.
my version of this would look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So like what's the first entryway, right? Because my entryway in tech was like project management. I did like WordPress websites, and then I brought in developers to maybe do some of the more complex areas. And then I realized, oh, I can talk with developers. Well, I can use that as a skill to just do that, right? So double down on that part of
Mm-hmm.
my skills. But one thing that I wanted to point out is like, I was reading a book recently um, about like business management, and there's a lot of case studies, and it mentioned this amazing reframe of things. It's like a lot of companies, and in general, a lot of marketing, a lot of things in America, especially, is all about the lack of. But it's really like it doesn't make that's only because like that creates immediate need, which makes more sales. Okay, right? But like what
Mm-hmm.
if we
Yeah.
reframe that completely to do more of what your strengths are, what your passion is, and find that intersection of where your passion and the passion and how it's valued in the market of whatever industry you're in. And that's where you kind of develop like your professional career at. And there's a lot of areas to do that in tech, but really focusing on like, where do you have the least resistance, the most interest, kind of like what's your first entryway? And from
Mm-hmm.
there, as another thing is like, you talk about confidence and in some of your other things. Um, and also your headline, which I really like, it really brings the point home. Like as someone builds confidence, they naturally become more open to things that may have felt harder before. That's my speech on that topic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I have to admit that even my title, Become a Confident Mentor in 10 Hours, it's also a clickbait
Mm-hmm.
because this is what people are looking for. This is kind of my doorway for people to get the end result. But the end result is that they build confidence through getting to know themselves and stop expecting themselves to be something else. Because when you
Mm-hmm.
not feel confident, a lot of it is not feeling adequate, is not feeling that you
Mm-hmm.
can do something that you should be doing. So a big part of it is removing all these shoulds and discovering what can work. And for example, the
Mm-hmm.
reason I felt so, well, not felt, it was fact, I was borderline unemployable. It was hard for me to not get fired from a bunch of jobs, is I'm really not a process person. This means when I'm doing something technical, I'm really not somebody who notices the small detail. I'll just do it and want to get it done. I'm a little bit more on the product, but mainly I'm a people person. And I was in the most wrong positions for to be a people person. I was expected to be a process person, which is the part that I'm least good at.
Mm-hmm.
I have a friend, and she's a very good photographer, and I'm also doing photography. My process is absolutely unconscious. Like if somebody came to ask me, how do you plan the scene? How do you plan the lighting? I'm like, what? I just put the light here and I take pictures, and that's it. And she would be like, you see this tiny shadow on the nose, it creates this kind of atmosphere, and if you move it like this, it would happen. I would be like, oh my god, how did you even, I didn't even notice there was a nose in this photo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's the difference between a conscious process and an unconscious. And she's like a very processed person. She can dig into the small details for hours. I cannot. With a
Yeah.
gun to my head, I cannot.
Yeah, and everyone has their strengths and we don't all have to do the same thing. So I kind of want to wrap up on this topic of like we don't all have to be doing the same thing. That would be unnecessary and boring. And
Yeah.
we all have like different value to bring to whatever the world, our workplace, our relationships. So maybe what would you, if you wrapped up what we talked about today, what are some comments you'd like to end with?
Um, I think the main thing that comes to mind is if you feel right now that you are lacking something, that you are not good enough at doing what you want to do and you don't feel confident, it's not because you really lack something. It's because you haven't yet discovered what is it that you can really lean into.